My name is George Bolin, and you want to know my story?
Sure.
Back in 1969 and 1970, I was hired by a company called Texas Eastern Transmission Corporation to assemble for them 33 blocks of downtown Houston. And it was the property that ran from between Rusk and Dallas on the east side of Main Street all the way over to the 59 elevated freeway. And we would know it today as the location of the George R. Brown Convention Center and the Discovery Green Park and Houston Center 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the park and the Park Place that's under construction right now, and the Four Seasons Hotel. So back in 1969, when I was hired to do this, all of that property was totally underdeveloped. It was mostly grade level parking lots, a few one-story warehouses, and a couple of very old apartment buildings that maybe had 18 or 20 units in them. I was asked to do a study of the area by a vice president at Texas Eastern, and I did the study and completed it and presented it to him, and this is where sheer luck entered into it. I presented it to him on a Monday morning, at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. We went over the presentation of the availability of the properties in the study area, and I think there were 160 properties, different ownerships, and determined that the vast majority of them were available at what we felt like was a reasonable price. And we finished up our meeting about 11 o'clock, and the vice president immediately took the presentation to the president of Texas Eastern and showed it to him. And he was named Baxter Goodrich, and Mr. Goodrich at that point in time was planning on having lunch with Mr. George Brown, the chairman of Texas Eastern. So he took the presentation to lunch at noon on Monday, and Mr. Brown looked through it and said he wanted to take it home and study it that night, which he did Monday night. Tuesday morning they had a board meeting. It was unbeknownst to me, and this is where the luck comes into it. Mr. Brown suggested that he thought the board should approve the acquisition of all of this property, and so the board voted with one dissenting vote. They voted to acquire this property. At about 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from the vice president of Texas Eastern, and he said, "Can you be in my office at 8 o'clock in the morning?" And I said, "Well, yes." "What for?" And he said, "We want to buy that property." And I said, "Which piece?" And he said, "George, we want to buy all of it." I guess that's probably the most stunning conversation I've ever had with anyone. But I went down, met with him, and he informed me that they did, in fact, want to buy the entire 33 blocks that I had presented to them. And we started, this was probably March of '69, we started doing our planning. We put together a team we had attorneys and accountants, and I assembled about 16 brokers that took about eight of them out of my firm, and I called a competitor, Jim Schindler, and asked him if he would be interested in joining with us, and he readily agreed, and he brought about 8 of his brokers with him. And so we started this planning process. We arranged for abstracts on each of the blocks rather than title insurance policies. And on June the 1st of 1969, we made our first offers. We tried to offer each person about 75% of what we really thought their property was worth. And which enabled us gave us some trading room that we could trade up to the value that we felt like the property was truly worth. And we started signing up contracts. Our first objective, there were 3 properties that had for sale signs on them. We signed them up the first day. We really felt like that was the most vulnerable areas that we had, so we signed those properties up. We made another conscious decision to buy everything in my name, George Bolin, trustee. And the reason for that was we didn't want anyone on the east side of town, downtown, to think that there were more than one buyer looking for property in that area. We didn't want them to think that there was competition and that they could play Joe Jones against George Bolin. And so each offer was made in my name, and title was to the property was taken in my name when we closed on it. We had American Title Company handled all of the closings, and Harris County Abstract Company did the abstract work. The abstracts on each block were then, once they were built, they were turned over to Vincent Elkins, and there was a team of attorneys. I think there was about 25 attorneys at Vincent Elkins that worked on this project and did the abstract examination and gave us opinions on the title of the property. We were working through this, and I'd say we were probably 50% of the way through it in about March of 1970. February of 1970, when Mr. Jennings informed me that we had to speed up the acquisition due to the fact that there was an annual meeting of Texas Eastern forthcoming in early March, and that they could not withhold any information from the stockholders. So we would have to make an announcement about what we were doing. All of this was done very secretively. We had a secret private office that we operated out of, where no one other than our team was allowed in the office for any reason. We had on the walls, we had aerial photographs, we had a lot of confidential information. Each of the properties were assigned a number, and so that if someone even inadvertently came across the file, it wouldn't mean anything to them. And we had to really accelerate everything from about February through the first week or so of March, and then we made the announcement on a Texas Eastern called a press conference on a Saturday afternoon and made the announcement so that the 2 newspapers then, the Houston Post and the Houston Chronicle, would each have an equal shot in making the announcement being on a Sunday morning. We waited until the Saturday afternoon editions were out and then made the announcement to the press so they could feature it on a Sunday morning newspaper. And then the following Tuesday was an annual meeting of the stockholders, and it was all announced to them at that point in time. But in the process, we were able to acquire 155 of the 160 properties. There were 5 that were holdouts. Texas Eastern made a decision to donate a large portion of their property, about 8 blocks of it, to the city of Houston for the George R. Brown Convention Center. And 4 of those properties that we were unable to buy were within that area where the George R. Brown Convention Center is. And of course, the city enjoys the power of condemnation, and so they condemned those 4 properties and ended up with a solid block of about 8 blocks on the east side of downtown. This is the area now that is also the Discovery Green Park that's just opened, and other major developments. So we turned a very unproductive area of Houston into a major tax revenue source by the development of all of these improvements. And originally Texas Eastern had some plans to, they looked at the possibility of bridging over the streets. And a couple of instances, if you go downtown in that area, you will see that they in fact did this. They then abandoned that area, that objective, but they had originally planned on bridging over every street within the 33 block area. The city had abandoned their air rights after 50 feet so that Texas Eastern could build and wasn't confined. A building was not confined to the 250-foot square that existed down there at the time. It was an absolute fascinating venture on our part to be involved in it and to be able to keep it a secret for really for the entire time. I mean, virtually no one found out about it. I think it was one or two breaches, but they were not very significant. And it was a totally fascinating project, and one that I'm not sure can be done again due to a lot of reasons, but it would be very difficult for someone, I think, to duplicate this type of effort. And now it's a major part of downtown Houston.
What'd they pay all in?
All in about around $40 million for the property. Probably on today's market, it would probably be worth $1 billion. At the time, we had estimated the original price at slightly more than $20 million. It ended up costing us almost double that, but certainly turned out to be well worth it, I think, for everyone involved.